Ambassador, Dutch government and you personally invested a lot of effort and time in supporting Special Prosecutor's Office as a main tool in fight against organized crime and corruption. Does this newly opened high-profile racketeering case changes anything in your stance towards Special Prosecutor's Office?
Well, first of all, let me say clearly that no one is or should be above the law. So in that sense, whenever there are serious allegations of some wrongdoings, they should always be properly investigated. And if there is sufficient ground, they should be prosecuted. But if you ask me if it changes my stance on the institution of the SPO, no, it doesn't. Because if I look back to where Macedonia was 4 years ago, when the public prosecution actually did nothing with the then serious allegation of some high-level corruption going on, I would say it was absolutely necessary to establish an SPO. And I'm proud that my country assisted the SPO. We invested €500,000 of Dutch taxpayers' money into capacity building for the SPO. And I think it yielded some results, not only in terms of verdicts, but also seizure of important assets. And it raised, you could say, the standards of prosecution in North Macedonia. So I'm only happy that the public prosecution is now stepping up its efforts.
Perception in the part of the public is that after this case, it's very much clear that the rule of law is something like a mission impossible in North Macedonia. But there are opposite views also, that the sole fact that one prosecutor investigates another prosecutor is an argument countering the claims of absence of rule of law. Which one of these positions is closer to you?
Well, let me say, in general, a rule of law in any country of the world, including my own country, is never finished. It always requires constant attention. And it's also important to stress that if the high-level corruption is not adequately investigated, is not addressed, is not sanctioned, then you can hardly expect from individuals that they will respect laws and regulations. So I think it's of utmost importance that the high-level corruption is addressed, and I'm happy that that is more and more the case. And let me maybe add also that, in fact, high-level corruption fighting is not done to satisfy the European Union. I think it's most of all because the citizens ask it.
Will these new developments have an effect on Dutch position for setting a date of start of accession negotiations with the European Union this October?
Well, I think my country made time and again clear that we care about rule of law. That's the most important thing we see for the European Union at the moment, inside the EU, but also definitely for new member states. And that's why we always make a point of that. That's why we also said, again, that high-level corruption should be addressed. And when it comes to the SPO specifically, let me make very clear, this is not about personalities. It is about institutions, but most of all about results. And the institutions should produce the results. If you ask me about the institution, I think it's important that the cases that have been investigated by the SPO should be continued, and also that the future SPO, whatever name it will have, but that it has sufficient independence and sufficient means to carry out its important work.
So you don't think that this will have any effect on your decision of your government in October?
I think we will very carefully look at the results. We will look at the track record on rule of law and fighting high-level corruption.
Mm-hmm. What was the position of the Dutch foreign minister during the June meeting of the ministers at General Affairs Council concerning North Macedonia?
Well, we have our parliamentary procedures preceding any European Council or GAC meeting. In this case, the Dutch Parliament adopted a motion on Albania and not on North Macedonia. So on North Macedonia, there were no reserves expressed, which gave the government a certain freedom of maneuvering. But unfortunately, it was never tabled because of the procedural issues in the June Council.
In these new circumstances, do you expect to have a new debate in the Dutch Parliament concerning date for North Macedonia? before October?
Yes, I would say that normally before any GAC meeting, the Dutch Parliament would indeed have a debate on this. But since this debate will only take place 4 months after the previous debate, if nothing else changes, one would expect that the same positions would apply. So what that means for North Macedonia is that the reforms should continue, that the country should focus on indeed showing results, showing track records in rule of law and in fighting corruption. And if you ask me, the last thing that this country needs is early elections. I would say the calls for early elections strike me as highly irresponsible.
Can you compare the situation now when you are leaving the country in a couple of days from now and when you first came here as an ambassador?
I would say the country has made quite tremendous progress. If you go back to 2015, when the European Commission qualified the rule of law as state capture in then Macedonia, there was a political crisis when I came here that seemed almost unsolvable at that time. We were in the Purgino process. In the end, I think the political crisis was resolved. The country came out of that crisis. I think the public debate has changed in the 4 years that I've been here. It's much more open now. There's much more open criticism. There's more balance in media. And finally, and certainly not the least thing, when Macedonia was kind of at odds with many of its neighbors 4 years ago, North Macedonia now has finally solved this name issue. And let me assure you, none of my colleagues back in 2015 thought that was likely going to happen, but it has happened. And North Macedonia is now on the verge of becoming a NATO member country. So yes, I would say that's quite some progress.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.